Okay, it's 12 noon. It's time to start the webinar. Hope you guys are excited as I am. Today's guest, like I said, I was talking right before the webinar started, that very dynamic, has a lot of good offerings to present, and of course, we'll be doing that shortly. And as you see from our agenda, just to go over things so we have an understanding of how things are going to play out. It's going to be a quick, fast 1 hour. First, this is our welcome period. I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, and he is going to present. There'll be a short sponsor break where you can submit questions. Like for me, I have attended webinars myself, and the presenter or the moderator will ask questions, and for some reason I can't quite get them out fast enough. So in this case, what we put in, it was a little sort of a sponsor break where you can submit questions if you have any. Then we'll have a Q&A period, and then we'll say thank you, and we'll head about our day. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce today's guest speaker, Dr. Mark Greenwald, or Mark Greenwald as he is known. He is a learned practitioner, a doctor, and one heck of a guy. So yeah, in lieu of sort of going over his many accolades, he suggested that we just dive into the information. And again, to give you a sense of things, in case you can't see on the screen, is, care transitions, best practices. So you think you know how to reduce readmissions? Well, guess again. I'm really excited to see what he has to say about that. And so without any further ado, Mark, are you ready to present?
We're ready.
Okay, well, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. I want to thank ANCODA for sponsoring this. Thank Jed for helping to set me up. I am not a professional webinar speaker. I'm just a real doctor. And with all the nice things you've said about me, I'm not sure I want to be living up to them. And the lack of accolades that we're talking about is not because I didn't want to go over them, it's because I don't have very many, so it makes it a lot easier. Anyway, next slide, please. I'm a critical care internist recovering. I have practiced, as you can see, we're going to go over my background and the presentation, the curse of readmissions, corporate ambivalence, which is always fun, an analysis of readmissions, the most important part, the working programs that have reduced readmissions, adverse selection, and the summary. And please, I have hired the NSA to watch your keystrokes, so you may not Google Kelly Johnson during this presentation. I'll tell you about him later. Next slide. I'm a critical care internist. I have practiced critical care, did it for 32 of my 42 years of practice. Inpatient internal medicine, followed the patients through the outpatient setting or skilled nursing facility. I took care of them in long-term care with palliative care, hospice, and don't tell anybody, but I actually made house calls. That reminded me of a New Yorker cartoon from the 50s where the doctor was walking out of his office and the uniformed chauffeur was holding open the door of the Rolls Royce, and the doctor was saying, "No, no, Jeeves, the Ford. I'm making house calls today." Next slide. There's a perception that readmissions reflect a lower quality of care. I've spent a lot of time analyzing that, looking through the literature, talking to people and networking, and I've come to a conclusion. I haven't the faintest idea if this is true or not. And if anybody is sure, I'd be happy to find out what they're basing it on. CMS, of course, is taxing organizations with penalties for excess readmissions. I'm not sure what excess means since we don't know what the correct number of readmissions is. I think this is what happens when the government makes rules in the absence of data and medicine by committee. As you know, CMS is expanding the penalties, both in percentage and for more diagnoses coming. There's also the public penalty, since this is being published, and it's sort of like training a puppy. Shame, shame, bad dog. I think there are better ways to do this, but I'm not government. I'm just a doctor. The whole idea is this fosters a public perception of poor care by the many hospitals that have what CMS has described as excess readmissions. Next slide. Curse of readmissions is sort of like the curse of the skin disease that used to be advertised many years ago. So the curse of psoriasis. Anyway, curse of readmissions. All right. Well, anyway, So we work hard to admit a patient. We work hard and fast to care for the patient in the hospital, as you all know that your hospitalists do, assuming you've got hospitalists who work with them. You work hard to discharge the patient under the new mandates. There's prescriptions with medication reconciliation, which takes an extraordinary amount of time. Patient gets instructions by the new rules, and I've seen programs that create these instructions, and they usually print out somewhere between 25 and 30 pages of unreadable gobbledygook and gibberish, which I can't understand, and a patient with anything less than a PhD can't understand either. And then this follow-up. They go to busy primary care physicians whose main job is to get on to the next patient because their income depends on their RVUs. So the patient then appears in the emergency department in all his glory 30 days or less after discharge, back to the bad dog. Lower socioeconomic groups and those hospitals that are in lower income areas feel this. There's a higher readmission rate. And there's the curse. No matter what we do, they come back. Maybe they just love us. I don't know. There we go, corporate ambivalence. And here we get to the chief financial officer. He's looking at a revenue stream, and he's trying to balance the penalties for readmissions versus losing the DRG payment for the readmission. And every time we admit a patient for heart failure, the hospital may get $5,000 to $7,500. If the patient doesn't get admitted, they lose that, even though the penalty may eventually go away if they have enough patients not admitted. But for each patient not admitted, they're losing the DRG payment. Any hospital has been able to figure that out. I haven't met that hospital yet. This is really wetting the thumb and holding up to the wind to try to figure out what to do. Some hospitals are putting patients in observation when they come back, but that doesn't work because hospitals lose money on every observation patient because of the cost of caring for them exceeding by so much the very small payments for actually bringing them in. The math varies by region and by hospital. Next slide, please. The causes of readmissions, as you know, include but are not limited to transition failures, erroneous planning, less than robust in-hospital care, outpatient access or lack of outpatient access, failure to identify high-risk patients, worsening or end-stage disease, lack of patient accountability. I love that one. We're accountable for everything, but the patient doesn't have to do anything. But that's life. The most important thing in my mind in terms of readmission rates goes back to Epstein's article in the New England Journal in December of 2011. A CDC study published in 2011, which looked at 3 years of admission rates in thousands of emergency rooms across the country, came to the conclusion that there was a very high correlation between admission rates and readmission rates in any given hospital. The overall admission rates across the country were about 12.8% for emergency departments. Hospitals in the area that I've been in and I'm familiar with have range up to 22%. There are too many hospital beds, too few patients truly sick enough to warrant admission. And so, with just like the Oric vacuum ads sucking the spots off the Greyhound, they're sucking patients off the street, and ED physicians basically say, I haven't yet met a patient I can't find an excuse to admit. And the readmission rates in many of these hospitals is also high and correlates with the admission rate. Next slide, please. That was the introduction. And what I'm here for is to tell you about 2 working programs. These aren't demonstration programs. They're working programs with demonstrable results. I'm not going to solve your problems, assuming you have any, but if you're in the webinar, I presume you do. What I'm going to do is tell you how I and my team solved someone else's problem. Just like the doctor columnists in your local newspaper who won't address your particular problem for fear of you-know-what, I can give you some ideas to perhaps move forward with. Next slide, please. The first program I'm going to talk about is for managed care or an accountable care organization. Managed care is basically easy, and an ACO is really just a managed care without a network or a single insurer. It's just a little bit more complicated for the provider. The goals of decreased readmissions really is consistent with, even though it's not a direct goal, of the overall goals of a managed care program. The IOM, as you remember, basically said that patient care should be safe, effective, patient-centered, timely, efficient, and equitable. 6 goals. I have trouble with lists, and I rattle those off because I have them in front of me. But I created an executive summary for that, which is really our mantra for patient care. Everything the patient needs, nothing the patient doesn't need, provided at the right time in the right place. And if you go by that, everything else falls into place. So the purpose of the program in the managed care was to fulfill the 6 goals of the IOM. Let me rephrase that. That was my goal for the managed care program. The organization's goals was to stop a flood of red ink. The populations, there are 2 populations selected. I'm going to focus on one just to make it easy. The results on both were very similar. It was a managed Medicare population. So almost all the patients or clients were 65 and older. The population was relatively stable with about a 10% or less annual turnover. The disease burden was high. We practice in a low socioeconomic area, and while these patients are on Medicare as opposed to, for example, Medicaid, most of them picked the managed care program because it was substantially cheaper than getting Medicare and a Medicare Medigap program plus drug coverage. So a high disease burden with a relative weight of 1.23, where 1.0 would be average for this Medicare population, coupled with low socioeconomic background, which also translates out into challenges for family support, ability to take care of themselves, functional spouses, and so on, not to mention functional children, put a severe crimp in the ease of creating continuity of care. Our goals that I set up for the program were quality, clinical quality, patient satisfaction, which really is part of quality, and lastly, patient translated as profit. My sense was and has been in the past that if we do the first 2 very well via the IOM goals, the third will always fall into place. Can I have the next slide, please? So the goals of the program were first to create a program that worked. Time to implementation. The decision to do this was made in August of 2011. I was given 6 weeks to set up a program and have it operational. Not to present plans, but to actually put it to work. What I created first off was a concierge team. I know the word concierge conjures up the sort of stuffy guy in the Four Seasons Hotel at a very fancy desk, getting you $400 theater tickets on Broadway, charging you a little bit extra, and then you tip him another 10 to 15% of the amount he got you. No, that's not what a concierge team is. In concierge medicine, of course, you pay $5,000 to $10,000 a year to go to the head of the line, like the Royal Pains show on TV. Sort of a nice life. That being said, what we decided to do was provide concierge care at no extra cost to these patients, because that is the way I've always practiced medicine, and that is the way I felt that we could provide the best care and have the best chance of reaching our goals. We created protocols, pathways, and decisions, and we put together the human components of the team. So the first human components were really myself and a very sophisticated nurse practitioner. This was on the inpatient-based but not inpatient-limited side of care. So we were based in the hospital but extended our reach out into the outpatient side, and I'll get to that in just a little while. We also put together gradually after startup a support team which became one with us, and that included people such as, and not limited to, a patient coordinator, representative from the visiting nurse associations that we were working with, our community partners, physical therapy, palliative care, hospice, skilled nursing facility, case managers, disease managers, and complex care coordinators. So as we put all this together, we were already up and running, and we started to work on October 11th, 2011. Just for the record, I wanted to do it on 11/11/11, but they said you can't wait another month, so we had to settle for 10/11/11. We created 24/7 availability, and we started new processes. Let's make believe for a moment that you're a patient coming to the emergency department of the facility that we were working in. You get to the emergency room, you have more than a cold, you don't know what it is, you've been sick for a couple of days. You'd be seen briefly by the emergency department physician, and by the way, if it was change of shifts, you'd be seen by a second emergency department physician. You'd be teed up to be admitted. A hospitalist would come at some point and admit you to the hospital. Why would he admit you? Because the ED physician said you should be admitted. So you'd be admitted to the hospital by the hospitalist. You would then be taken over by another hospitalist the next day. And by the way, if that was the day before the change of hospitalist shifts, you would get another hospitalist the next day. And at night, you're covered by another hospitalist. I'm running out of breath here. Anyway, you then get discharged. You're seen for about 5 minutes or less per day face-to-face by the hospitalist. And when you're discharged, you may have a few minutes extra to get some instructions, but the nurses, of course, give you most of those instructions. We did something a little bit different. We created a system where we were alerted when the patient came to the emergency department. It was flagged on the tracker board, and one of our team got there within 20 minutes or so of the patient arriving. This was during the day, of course, 12 hours, roughly 7 a.m. to maybe 6 p.m. We would see the patient in conjunction with the emergency department physician. If the patient just had a cold, sore throat, we would work with them to see their primary physician, preferably the next time instead of coming to the ED. For many of these patients whom the ED admitted, we would then take over exclusively. We would then do something unique. It's called a history and a physical exam. A true history and physical as taught in the old-fashioned medical schools and training programs. We would actually listen to the patient before ordering lots of fancy tests. Then we would decide how sick the patient is. Of the patients who were referred for admission to us, we sent home roughly 45% of them. I knew this was going to happen because I had helped out the hospitalist team on occasion, and mistakenly I had sent patients home who didn't need to be admitted. I got taken to the corporate woodshed for that because I wasn't helping the revenue flow of the hospital, but be that as it may, I knew what the patient mix was like. So after sending 45% of the patients home, you can imagine what's happening to the managed care admission rate, where reducing admissions does not conjure up a bad vibe, and we were allowed to continue doing that. We had to change the culture in the ED with both physicians and nurses. It was very interesting. We triaged the patients, as I just said, and when the patient was admitted, and let's say you're the patient, we would admit you to the hospital. We would see you on the floor. We would discharge you. We would be in contact with your primary care physician, not just by computer, but by phone, and we would make sure that you got followed up. If you were one of the 10% of the sickest patients, we not only would make sure you got followed up, you would follow up with our team on the outpatient unit of the hospital for your combined congestive failure, diabetes mellitus out of control, hypertension, and so on down the line, with the permission of your primary physician. And we would get you through the worst part of your recovery. Next slide, please. After discharge, we went to the outpatient integration, which is where the big team came in that I told you about. And after creating the team, we started having, 2 months after the startup of the program, weekly meetings for about an hour with all the people that I noted on the team, the patient coordinator, the VNA representatives, physical therapy, palliative care, hospice, skilled nursing facility, case and disease managers, and so on. We would strategize for the program. We would strategize on specific patients, the inpatients, the recently discharged patients, and patients we'd identified in our panels as being high risk. We would also look at patients in other hospitals, patients in tertiaries, patients in other skilled nursing facilities, patients in other community hospitals not in our network, and work with them to make sure they got discharged properly, that they got follow-up properly, and that they would use us hopefully the next time around. The next step was to create something we felt was unique, a complex high-risk patient program. For this, we were lucky enough to get a highly skilled, very sophisticated geriatric nurse practitioner that I would go to in preference to 99% of the physicians I've ever met. She was able to put together programs in a very short period of time to identify high-risk patients, not by national screenings alone, but combining national screenings with area-specific and very sophisticated patient-specific screenings. For example, a fall risk program, not only the ones, the criteria on the national agenda, but also unoperated cataracts, which you know compromises night vision. A history of a stroke, history of a neurologic disease involving movement, and so on down the line, not just the usual things. And then we were able to offer those people an evaluation of their home safety and their gait. And then we were also able to offer them at no charge training. One fractured hip can create heartache, headaches, and death for patients. It also costs at least $50,000 in upfront costs. So if we took the patients in the program and we have prevented one hip fracture, we have not only prevented an admission, we have helped somebody's quality of life and probably duration of life. Probably we're also creating fewer readmissions. When you look at these teams and you look at the programs, this is where Kelly Johnson comes in. For those of you who did not know who Kelly Johnson was, Kelly Johnson was the person who ran the Skunk Works. The Skunk Works, of course, is where all those wonderful planes were devised that have protected us over the years, from the stealth fighter to the flying wing, all those good things. Kelly Johnson worked on 4 things that people needed to do their jobs properly and do them well. Structure, form follows function. Structure the organization, and at the intersection points, the roles. Recruitment of the right people to fulfill those roles. Communication, setting up a matrix of communication that allowed everyone to know what everyone else was doing, as opposed to compartmentalization, which may work for the CIA but doesn't work real well when you're developing a complex plane, or in our business, even more complex patient care. And finally, the tools to do the job, which, as you know, having all the tools to do your job is very unusual in the real world, certainly unusual in medicine. I was able to make sure that people had the tools they need to do the job. Next slide, please. So the managed care program, which I love, was the most fun, but we also created a fee-for-service program. This is really a pilot. The slide hasn't completely come through, but we'll go through it anyway. So we want to identify, first of all, we wanted to identify the number of readmissions to reduce. This goes back to the CFO balancing the financial penalty versus the DRG payments for each admission. We identified the patients in the pilot program by the high resource users. These are patients, and many hospitals have them, of patients who are in every week, every 2 weeks to the emergency department, get admitted 12 to 30 times a year, and they really skew the numbers. So we identified our highest risk users, checked with our CFO to make sure it wouldn't drag down the admissions too much, but would perhaps even get us off the radar. We prioritized their management. What did we do? We created what we called a Tiger team. That's a phrase that's been used in industry. It's a cross-functional team, and in our case it was physician assistant, case managers, and ED nurses. And we also identified these patients when they came to the emergency department. Instead of the usual full evaluation by the ED physician, expensive resource utilization, including CTs, MRIs, and those things that ED physicians love to do, the team descended on those patients within 20 minutes of their arrival, similar to the way the managed care team not descends, but coordinates with and collaborates with patients when they come in. These patients were then managed in the emergency room. Their readmission rate plummeted, and their culture started changing because they no longer were assured of being admitted every time they came into the emergency department. The processes involved ED triage, careful follow-up, and explanations, as well as the discharge from the emergency department to home, again with the visiting nurse services or whatever that they needed for help, but they were discharged. And my belief is that the ED is probably the lowest hanging fruit of all in terms of reducing readmissions. In the first year of the managed care program, we reduced admissions by 45%. Roughly, we went from 428 admissions per thousand at baseline to a low of 215 admissions per thousand. We weren't able to sustain that for more than 4 months, but we did level off at 224 admissions per thousand, lowest in the network. What happened to readmissions? So our readmission rate initially was about close to the hospital average, but we measured them about 16.5%. That was the first we could really cull that out. We reduced them somewhat to 13.5%, which isn't a huge drop, but remember we had reduced admissions by 45%, so now we were readmitting 13.5% of 45% fewer admissions. Not only that, and here's where that gorilla in the room comes from, the adverse selection. The patients who were getting admitted in managed care under our program were significantly more sick than the ones we sent home, and therefore the acuity had gone up. So despite the fact that we were dealing with sicker patients, the readmission rate still went down a little bit, which is counterintuitive to the thought that if they were sicker, the readmission rate would go up. What else did we do? Our skilled nursing facility usage went down by 45%. Our long-term acute care hospital, LTAC use, went down by more than 90%. The year prior to the program, we were spending 62 hours per member per month on LTACs. A year after the program was in place, we were spending $1.12 per member per month. We greatly increased VNA use by a factor of 5 to 8, but that's so cost-effective that our overall cost plummeted. We actually changed a $750,000 loss in the calendar year 2011 to a $1.25 million calendar year 2012. What happened in the fee-for-service pilot? We had a 90% reduction in readmissions in the target group. Now, granted, just like the disclaimers on TV when you see the either the weight loss ads or the profit from churning real estate ads. These are unique improvements either in weight or in bottom line from churning real estate, and we don't promise that you'll be able to get the same thing. I don't promise that you'll get a 90% reduction in readmissions in a target group, but certainly we were able to achieve that, and it indicated to us that the program worked, not necessarily at the 90% level for everybody. Next slide, the unknowns. We don't know about the linkage of readmissions and quality. It's unproven. We don't know the number of truly hospital-dependent patients. In other words, we don't know what the baseline readmission rate really will be. By the way, there's a very good article it was published that just came. I just saw it yesterday. This came from the advisory board, and it indicates the total cost of care of various diseases. For an acute MI, for example, 75% or more of the cost is the actual hospitalization, but 40% of the hospitalization costs are readmissions. We don't know how many of those are necessary, and obviously there's a huge financial opportunity to reduce those, but as an article, it was either in the New England Journal or Annals pointed out within the past 4 months, there are patients who are truly hospital dependent, and we're never going to not readmit those unless we find some other venue which doesn't exist at the moment. There are unproven benefits of our perception of better care, and the last one is really a caution. We don't know how endothermic these programs are. For those of you who didn't major in math, chemistry, or science in college, an endothermic reaction is one in which you have to keep putting in energy in order to make it work. In other words, you don't put in a little bit of energy and get all these, all the solar energy out. You have to keep working to keep the program going. It doesn't run on autopilot. The program is endothermic. We have to keep working on it, improving it, overseeing it, and measuring it constantly in order to keep it working. Okay, next. So we've succeeded in greatly reducing readmissions and cost for the managed Medicare population. We've actually reduced the number of readmissions by about 50%, even though the relative readmission rate reduction from 16.5% to 13.5% isn't anywhere near as striking, but the total numbers are huge. And we've identified high utilizers in fee-for-service and shown that we can actually make a huge dent in their readmission rate. We've succeeded in creating perpetuating high-functioning teams, and the ramifications of that to me, are huge in that we can build similar teams for other purposes if it can just get hospital administrators out of our way. I hope there aren't too many hospital administrators listening, but I can't control that. I think that last bullet point is very important for me as somebody who's interested in patients, because high-functioning teams on the inpatient and outpatient side really are the best way to improve care. And if we can reduce readmissions as a side effect of improving care, then I am all for it. Okay, I guess we're going to hear from Ancoda and get your questions. You can ask all you want. I don't have that much time to answer them. I will do the best I can. The last slide has my email address, and feel free to contact me if I raised any questions in your mind or if you want to follow up with me. Thank you all very much. Jed, it's all yours.
Wow. Thank you, sir. That was wonderful.
And it's 12:35. What more can you ask?
You are a master. Yeah, there is something wonky going on with our little screen here. It's not anything that looks to be anything other than Wi-Fi. So hopefully it'll clear up for some of you folks who aren't getting this. So I will simply go through the announcements, and then this is your time when you can pose questions via the question pane. And so here are the announcements. Essentially, if you want to, or if you're interested in sharing best practices that you may know, please let us know. We definitely we're passionate, and we are definitely on board with sharing best practices as much as we can. So if you have something you want to share with folks, please let us know. Our next webinar will be Tuesday, May 20th at 12 p.m. Eastern, as usual, 9 a.m. Pacific. And we'll go to the next slide here. If you do want to learn about care transitions or business opportunities in that field, please let us know. We have a very cool little animated video that I really recommend you check out, and that you can see, well, if you can't see based on the technology here. Our website is www.encoda.com/care-transitions. So just go to the Encoda website, and it should lead you directly to the video. And like I said, I would definitely recommend it. A little bit about Encoda Care Transition Software. We accept referrals from hospitals. It can assign care transition coach, schedule an episode. You know, you can there's best practice clinical documentation component. It includes billing and payroll calculation. It's fully HIPAA compliant, visibility to hospital, care team, and PCB. And more than anything, the goal of, or at least from like a sort of core value perspective, from Encoda's perspective, is what we're trying to do is avoid readmissions, which of course is good for, you know, the population, but also financially smart. So there's that. Let's see if we, also we have a free white paper. If you are interested in learning about how to increase profitability via care transition, then please let us know. It's also on our website, right on our front page, encoda.com. And now let's see if we have any questions. We do have one for Mark, and it is this. How was the Tiger team received by the ED physicians? Was it adversarial? Adversarial. Did you hear that, Mark?
I did. We anticipated an interesting dialogue, and we anticipated it because of the huge culture change the managed care team had caused in the emergency department, where patients who were teed up to be admitted were sent home instead, which was absolutely unheard of. We took the liberty this time of doing two things. First, we armed the Tiger team with sidearms. We networked with the chief of the emergency department physicians and the emergency department physicians as a group and individually to let them know what was going on, why we were doing what we were doing, and we were not challenging their decisions, but bringing more resources into play to better take care of the patients in another environment. The actual result was an incredibly smooth transition, understanding we had already been doing this in managed care for 1.5 years when we tried this on the fee-for-service side.
Well, great, thanks. We have a couple more if you have time. This next one is, we are a home care agency and would like to provide care transition management services to the hospitals that we work with. Who would you recommend that we speak with in the hospital? It depends on how the hospital is set up. In the hospitals I've been in, including the most recent one, case management, which included all the people who help plan for a patient's discharge, have a medical director. So a combination of the director for case management and the medical director for case management probably would be the best bet for the first contact. How do you keep the endothermic reaction going?
We put in energy. We have a process for constantly providing feedback to the members of the team in multiple ways. One, at the weekly meetings, people are recognized for the things they've done, and as we talk about individual patients at those meetings and the broader strategy, everybody's involved. Everybody supports everybody else on the team. I know this is unusual, but we all either win together or we lose together, and we picked a team made up of people who recognize that. It's held together and thrives on people working with each other. The second way is providing documentation. You know, in God we trust, all of us provide data. So we provide data, charts of patient satisfaction, charts of readmissions, charts of the various measurements of quality of care. The clinical team scores above the 95th percentile for patient satisfaction and HCAHPS. The outpatient unit the same. Excuse me. The handoffs, we measure medication reconciliations, and we track those on a regular basis. These dashboards are really invaluable for keeping everybody enervated, interested, and understanding that they're all valued.
Because we have two more questions, it looks like. And this one is, how do you manage emergency departments, physicians, and protocols?
We don't. What we do is we collaborate with the emergency department physicians. We provide them lots of feedback. We let them know that the patients we discharged are doing well or not doing well, as the case may be. And we also keep them up to date on a few of the things that we've accomplished over the last 2.5 years. One of the concerns of ED physicians, of course, is to send somebody home over their objections and the patient will die, and we'll all be up the creek, including them. In 2.5 years of sending tremendous numbers of patients home, not one patient has had a major adverse event after discharge. Follow-ups are rock solid. Telephone calls are made. Nobody gets lost in the shuffle. And
so the next one is, are most hospitals seeing readmissions as a critical issue, or do many of them just not care?
We are we are now beyond my area of expertise. When it comes to something like that, all I know is what I read in the literature. The hospitals that I'm familiar with are mainly concerned with reducing readmissions just enough not to get penalized. Again, because of that dichotomy in fee-for-service between losing the DRGs and losing the penalties. I don't know where they balance for any particular hospital. Hospitals that have a prominence of managed care, this is a no-brainer to manage patients at the right place at the right time. If the right hospital, so be it, but if they can be managed elsewhere, that's even better. And that applies to both readmissions and admissions. It's going to vary depending on patient mix and so on. I'm lost here.
Gotcha. Well, if you won't mind, we have one last question, and I think that'll be it for everybody. Once again, if you do want to see the slides from today's presentation, as there were some technical issues, definitely let us know, and we can send those right over to you. Also, we'll be having an edited version of this online at our website, ncoda.com. So if you would, please, there's one last question, and it's simply this. How do you educate and manage your Chief Financial Officer, or CFO?
I give him an allowance. Basically, I talk to the CFO. For many, many years, I've been sort of an interpreter. Woody Allen once made a movie where, for part of the movie, he's an interpreter down in a South American country, and the American representative. And the American representative would say something in non-accented English, and Woody Allen would translate it into Spanish-accented English for the dictator, who would then answer back in Spanish-accented English, and Woody Allen would translate that into non-Spanish-accented English to the American representative. Talking with CFOs is a little bit like that. I want to talk about quality of patient care, but they don't understand that. So what I've done for many years in my administrative roles, separate from my clinical roles in organizations, is to try to show how better clinical care results in more effective use of hospital resources, more effective use of hospital human resources, saving money on the supply end, and helping the CFO come to grips with what's changing in medicine by explaining those things in non-medical English. That's the best I can tell you. It's difficult.
Gotcha. Well, that was great. Well, I know I pumped you up early on in my intro, but I really think that you came through. I think you made me, you made me look good by proving that I was right in my intro. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your information, and thank you so much for your patience as we're working out these quirks. But thank you all. I think we should all give a virtual high five to Mark. I know we all can't see or hear each other, but if you are, in your office, maybe give him a clap or two. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure.
Once
Thank
again,
you.
we'll be here in about a month. And before I go, Mark, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, just to make sure to edit the bad jokes out of the edited version for the net.
I didn't hear any bad jokes, only good ones. Well, thanks again.